Hey there! Welcome to Spectrum Pulse, where we talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today, it's another unscripted movie review. It's been a long time coming, but we're going to be talking about Wicked for Good. So I didn't review the first Wicked movie in video form. I reviewed all the songs on Billboard Breakdown, but I never got around to the movie. Honestly, I've got any number of excuses as to why I got engaged within a couple of weeks of it actually coming out. There was a lot of other major album reviews that were on my schedule, year-end content, the whole shebang. Honestly, I didn't have a ton to say about it either. It was a pretty, mostly accurate representation of what the stage play is. Wicked's a pretty damn good musical, and a lot of that was represented on stage. I really liked seeing what Cynthia Erivo and Ariana Grande did. Ariana Grande arguably proved that she still has legit acting chops playing Galinda. I like Jeff Goldblum as Oz. I think that there was a lot of character brought to life in a whimsy and magic that really captured Oz. That being said, there was always going to be a problem with any continuation or exploration of Wicked Act 2, and that's because Wicked Act 2 in the musical has problems, pretty big ones. Now, I will go on record saying that a lot of the music itself is actually pretty good. It's got, in my opinion, 3 great songs, As Long As You're Mine, No Good Deed, and For Good. All of them are great songs in the continuity of the musical, but that's the word. It's continuity, because you're trying to fuse it in with, this is when a very cute high school framing of a romance becomes more epic and broad, and incidentally, we're now going to tie it into the continuity of The Wizard of Oz, somewhat, when we're not breaking it. And it also feels like there's elements that get brought into that production that just have not aged well. We'll get into more of this when we're talking about themes, but suffice to say, any sort of adaptation of the Act 2 of Wicked was going to be fraught. And indeed, I've seen a lot of reviews be extremely hard on it, when on some level, a lot of the problems that come with the second act of Wicked, they were in the musical. They've been complained about in musical circles for 20 years. So when I come here and say that Wicked for Good is not as good as last year's Wicked, it's no surprise. What I will say is that it was a little better than what I expected, but it does still have some problems. A lot of people are initially saying that the acting has gotten worse. I push back against that a little bit. I think that it's more of the roles that the characters were expecting to, that they played in the first Wicked, have now dramatically changed. They've gone more into archetypal forms, and they're trying to add depth wherever they can in between a script that really is not flattering them the way they should. The big person who I think takes the worst of it is Jonathan Bailey playing Fiyero. I'm not going to spoil who he eventually becomes, but he does become something, and I actually will say John Chu's portrayal of 2 transformation scenes are really well done in terms of actually etching out some of the body horror elements that come with it. In the way that he frames magic as something that is barely controlled and even less understood, I actually really like that in terms of both of these Wicked movies. He's also stuck playing a character that was going to be engaged to a woman that he does not love, and the fact that he has to tone down his chemistry with everyone and everything is, on the one hand, realistic in terms of the kind of quasi-undercover role that he's playing, not to spoil too much, but at the same time, you're also sucking one of the most charismatic individuals out of the story. A lot of people are saying that Ariana Grande is more wooden in this movie as well. I guess when you try to get away from the high level of quirkification that came from the first Wicked, there is going to be some of that downplayed. It's going for heavier dramatic stakes. It is apropos to what you would expect, though, in Act 2 of Wicked, if you follow on with the continuity. And that's kind of the problem that I have in terms of talking about a lot of elements here. A lot of what we're seeing, and a lot of the main critique I can make, I can point and say, well, yeah, but have you seen the musical? Have you engaged with the musical? These have been problems that are well known and documented, and the fact they managed to get around them as well as they did was impressive. I genuinely think Cynthia Erivo delivers the best performance in that I think that there is levels of subtlety to how she frames her moral conflicts throughout the story that I think is really well done. And I'll also give them credit. The scene with Nessa and Bach and Elphaba, given that that is widely conceded was one of the worst mainstream Broadway musical scenes in the 2000s, if not a much longer period of time, the fact that they managed to salvage that at all, and it's nowhere near as bad or problematic as it was, I will give them some credit. It doesn't fully work because, again, this movie is dabbling in themes that I'm not sure it fully can handle. We'll get into that. But it's nowhere near as excruciating to the discourse as it could have been. And honestly, getting around that part of it at all, I'll give them credit. Where things start to go awry for me is the acknowledgement that there are two songs that were written specifically for Wicked for Good that are trying to make a play for Best Original Song at the Academy Awards. That is why they are here. Let's be real. It has nothing to do with pacing. It's more to do with the fact that Wicked needs to try to get Oscars in some categories because with this script, there's no way in hell that the actors are going to have range in the script to be effectively able to pull that off. The two original songs, in my opinion, are not good, and they're not good because they're not memorable. And when you have a musical that's stacked with earworms, that's a problem. But they also reveal an issue with Wicked that comes with themes and economy of storytelling. Because Wicked is doubling down on some of the more political elements that you saw in the first one. There is the creeping tide of authoritarianism. It's described as fascist in terms of constructing a public. The public does play a pretty large role in both Wicked movies, and specifically the animosity and contempt that they have for anyone that is considered different or considered extraordinary in certain things. Yeah, there's a whole subsection of thematic mess to untangle there, especially when you have Elphaba, who again is a character who is coded as black. There is layers to that in that I think Wicked, the first movie teases towards, the second movie really chooses to double back against and not really get as radical as it could have been. Or, as radical as the original books were. That's the other thing. If you've read those original Wicked novels, you do recognize there was a certain level of Flanderization to make it palatable to the public in the 2000s, in the Bush years, that don't really reflect some of the radical politic of the book. You would like to think that the movie, instead of putting in two mediocre songs at best in order to plug up some character development, that they might have tried to delve into some of those political themes, given that the movie is clearly taking itself as more grandiose and epic and more serious, that you actually give it some teeth to it. But that doesn't really happen. And I have to at some point look at John Chu here as a director. The one thing I will say for him as a director is that I think he's going to get a lot of credit for basically assembling a very well constructed movie. One thing I will give to the Ariana Grande original song that they added, it's the better one, and I will say that there's some really nice directional tricks that they do in terms of how the camera moves back and forth around mirrors in the room that does really fit how a character like that could be surrounded in a hall of mirrors, trying to get into her own pathos. I think there's some good stylistic choices, but I don't think there was the courage to either break away from bad source material. And you know what? That's not surprising, because this is a Hollywood musical that came out originally on Broadway in the 2000s and is getting adapted in 2025. I'm not looking for the radical politic that comes with underscoring all those themes. But when you do introduce those themes, you make them more prominent, you draw on very specific iconography and images. The lyrics are directly implying in very broad, bombastic, melodramatic language the fact that Wonderful is actually performed shockingly well within the context of the musical. It gets frustrating because the musical feels caught between its potential of what it could be and what it actually is. And I think a big mistake with the musical would be judging it for what it could be rather than what it is. I have to deal with what's on the screen here. I think No Good Deed is exactly what it needs to be. I think that as long as you're mine, well, the chemistry was there. It was a little bit ridiculous, and it was very fun watching it in the theater with a whole group of middle schoolers who very plainly were having none of it. Again, it's one of those situations in comparison with what you would see where it's very clear that the endgame ship was always Alphaba Glinda, and any dalliance with Fiyero, it's not even going to be tolerated. But again, I do think that it was well staged for what it is. It's adapting difficult source material. But again, this is the key. When you put mediocre songs in, that was screen economy you could have used to develop and go deeper on those themes. And while the one solo song they give Alphaba, which is trying to plead for the animals to stick around, kind of ties into that, it's so toothless and cowardly that when the lion shows up to derail it, it's, well, almost apropos. At the same time, though, I do think there's things in this musical that have a lot of validity. I think Michelle Yeoh is very good as Madame Morrible. I think Jeff Goldblum has a little bit more room to breathe. I will also say that all the issues I had with the color saturation of the first Wicked have really been rectified. There's a lot more color and vibrance on display here. I like that when it comes to Oz, and not what they did with that Oz Great and Powerful movie that came out in the early 2010s. It was god-awful. Again, I think that there is some critique that has been revised here. I think that it could be benefiting of a sharper script. Sure. Do I wish that certain themes were developed upon? Sure. Do I think that there are some great emotional moments that succeed irregardless of that, especially in some of the music? Yes, as well. So a brief tangent here. My favorite musical is Chess. If you know anything about Chess, a whole bunch of things about me just made a lot more sense. But if you don't, it's a musical that was developed in the late 70s and basically has had a troubled production for the past 30, 40 plus years. That's because the book is difficult. It's dealing with the conflicts often framed within the chess world between the United States and the Soviet Union. It's also loaded with a whole bunch of divorce-laden melodrama, complete moral ambiguity. It's so political that it spins around to being non-political and then political again. It's not the grand socialist revolution or capitalist revolution movie that anyone's gonna hope for. Oh, and I might add that the main American character is named Frederick Trumper. Yes, I'm serious. So I'm of the belief that that musical will never get properly adapted for the screen, and probably better for it, because given today's climate, you want to throw that into the discourse, especially when the most famous song from that musical is One Night in Bangkok. So when I think about that, and when I think about the trials that took for Wicked to get made at all, because everyone knew the second act of Wicked is a bit of a mess, the fact that they managed to nail as much of the stage play musical flaws and warts and all, mostly stuck the landing, is an accomplishment. Do I wish it would have gone further? Yes. Do I think certain performances not pop in the same way as the first act of Wicked? Yes, even if the script does justify it. And I do think that there are some moments in terms of directorial choices, the transformation elements, everything with the Alphaba Nessa scene, which is marginally better. The fact they managed to salvage a good movie out of it is credible. Is it as good as it could have been? No. Do I think they could have used their screen economy more? Yes. Do I think that they ever would have bothered to do that if it meant sacrificing their best original songs to play for the Academy Awards? Let's be realistic here. So yeah, if you saw the first Wicked movie, this is worth seeing. If you are walking out of this feeling a little bit disappointed, being not as familiar with the source material, don't say I didn't warn you. But if you are a musical fan, they did what they could. I'll give them that. And I guess that's worthy of checking out. I guess. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you want to see more, please be sure to like, share, drop comments, subscribe. This is, again, a bit of a tough one to dig into because I think that there is layers of context that I kind of want to leave to other creators who are deeper in the musical space and also would be more deeply engaged with how some of what could be perceived as gestures toward a radical politic being kind of undercut by a tough script written across multiple decades that would not be amicable in their time for going as far as they could. It would require a more brazen movie that, let's be honest, we were never going to get. But hey, again, beyond that, leave your discourse down there below. Anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if y'all want to get something on my schedule before the end of the year, you're talking within the next week or two that the schedule is open. Please reach out to my Patreon or YouTube memberships in order to get access. Once again, don't feel obligated. Tough times out there. Recession's likely coming. The option's available. And hey, there's also opportunity to hang out on my Discord or just support the channel in general. But until then, I'm Mark. You're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.